Hello and welcome. My name is Alan and this was meant to be Friday's video. But before we jump into this video, I do want to go ahead and remind you, if you are intending or so inclined to support me, then we have two ways to do so. We have a Patreon account, which is a monthly, month-to-month donation system, and a Coffee account, which can do much the same, but also make single one-time donations. I'll have links to both in the description box below the video. If you are in financial difficulty or donating would put you in financial difficulty, please do not donate. I'd rather you take care of what you need to take care of. Things are tough on everybody right now, and yeah, especially with the idiots in charge. So, however, if you are in financial good shape and you wish to donate, thank you. I do appreciate it. It's me, myself, and I who make the videos. I do the research, filming, editing, posting, all that good stuff. One-man show. And I've personally sworn off doing commercials as a personal principle of ethics, and I make no money from the videos as of yet. With all that said, let's jump into this video dealing with U.S. presidencies and the executive branch. So, we looked at the end of the Madison presidency in our last episode, which gives us presidents 1, 2, 3, and 4 that we have taken a look at. And it'll bring us to number 5, the last of the Founding Father presidents. There are also other members of the Founding Fathers that have been in different roles in government. But yeah, as far as presidents, the first 5 are considered Founding Fathers. And that is James Monroe. And yeah, he, like the other Founding Fathers, it's kind of a mixed bag. None of the Founding Fathers were completely good. Well, most people aren't completely good, but there's always stuff you can look at the Founding Fathers, at all presidents, and say, yeah, that was a mistake. That was a bad decision. And yeah, like the others, Monroe's the same. A lot of things you can look at, oh, he's pretty good on this, but other things you can go, yeah, that was kind of stupid. From the University of Virginia's Miller Center. Monroe was the last American president of the Virginia dynasty and the first of the first 5 men who held that position. Yeah, because remember, 4 are from Virginia, 1 from Massachusetts of that first 5 presidents. Monroe also had a long and distinguished public career as a soldier, diplomat, governor, senator, and cabinet official. His presidency, which began in 1817 and lasted until 1825, encompassed what came to be called the era of good feelings. One of his lasting achievements was the Monroe Doctrine, which has become a major tenet of U.S. foreign policy in the Western Hemisphere. It originally didn't mean, yeah, let's go enforce our view on other countries in the Americas. It was just a way to tell Europe, Asia, whoever that wasn't from the Americas, stay out of the Americas. America, the United States, protects the Americas. This is the domain of the U.S. It didn't mean, oh, let's go and interfere to impose our will originally. Now it's used as that because there's a lot of warmongering, hate-filled, evil fucks who have been in power. Regardless, born April 28th, 1758, and died July the 4th, 1831. Third of the first 5 presidents to die on July the 4th, Independence Day. So yeah, kind of interesting. I always thought that was. Um, he was born in Westmoreland County, Virginia. Had his education from the College of William and Mary, graduating in 1776. Yeah, family's religion was Episcopalian, and like many of your early big names in American government in the early days, lawyer. Part of the Democratic Republican Party, Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, all Democratic Republicans, whereas Adams was a Federalist. Washington tried to say, we don't need political parties. And we see how this has turned out with political dumb dicks. He was nicknamed the last cocked hat, the era of good feelings president. Married Elizabeth Courtwright on February the 16th, 1786. And she lived 1768 to 1830. Had 3 children, Eliza, James, and Eliza Courtwright, James Spence, and Maria Hester. Is that Maria or Marla Hester? It's Maria. He was inaugurated March the 4th, 1817, serving until March the 4th, 1825, so a full 2 terms. A lot of presidents in the early days served 1 or 2 terms because it was just a normal thing. Serving long, because even back then, there was a lot put upon your plate to be president. Serving more than 2 terms usually beat people down, and they did not want a tyrant because many of them still had in their memory the rule of King George III. But would be buried in Richmond, Virginia. So yeah, that's an overview of James Monroe. Let's see if we can dig in a little more. This ain't, oh, quit that please. From the White House Historical Association, so take this with a grain of salt considering the idiot who's in there right now. Considered the last founding father president, James Monroe was born April the 28th, 1758, to an affluent slave-owning family in Westmoreland County, Virginia. Slave owning now is seen as a huge faux pas. Many presidents looked at it and they didn't like it, but they like, we don't want to rock the boat. We're a young nation and it helps our economy. But they had already made it so that you couldn't get any more slaves in a slave trade across the Atlantic or anything. Any slaves you had were the slaves you had. And so usually we started seeing definitely a lot of the families being split up at this point. But again, while many saw slavery as a bad thing, they did not want to try to rock that boat. His parents, Spence and Elizabeth Monroe, had aspirations for their eldest son, sending him to nearby Campbelltown Academy. His childhood changed dramatically when both of his parents passed away within 2 years of each other. Joseph Jones, who became a parental surrogate for the Monroe children, encouraged James to continue his education by attending the College of William and Mary. Monroe enrolled, but later left to enlist in the Continental Army's 3rd Virginia Infantry Regiment after the war. Monroe married Elizabeth Courtwright in 1786, and they had 3 children together. In terms of military, political, and administrative and diplomatic experience, he was one of the best qualified individuals to ascend to the presidency during the 19th century. He fought in the American Revolution, was wounded at the Battle of Trenton, served in the legislative bodies of the Virginia General Assembly, the United States Senate, and also served as governor of Virginia, held diplomatic posts across Europe for 4 different administrations, and served as Secretary of State and Secretary of War, briefly acting in both capacities during the Madison administration. So yeah, well-traveled, well-experienced, clearly somebody who seems to have what is needed to be a leader of the nation. He also studied law with Thomas Jefferson. In fact, because of his relationship with Jefferson, he purchased land adjacent to Monticello in Albemarle County, calling it Highlands. This plantation was one of several properties that Monroe owned during his lifetime, along with over 200 enslaved people who provided the labor to sustain the family, their guests, and the comforts they enjoyed. Some of these individuals accompanied the Monroes to Washington as well, and later the White House. In 1803, President Jefferson entrusted Monroe and Robert Livingston to acquire territory from France and secure access to the Mississippi River and the Port of New Orleans, Louisiana Purchase. The men exceeded all expectations, acquiring New Orleans and some 828,000 square miles west of the Mississippi for $15 million. In the Louisiana Purchase opened up the new opportunities for white settlers, often at the expense of Native Americans, and it also created a volatile mix of expansionism and slavery. Yeah, we start we want slave states. Oh, we want free states. Slave, free, slave. Yeah. We start seeing a lot of this. The Missouri Compromise, this shit, that shit. Again, if they had been willing to set the hammer down on slavery early on, I think we could have avoided a lot of this. But they were so, like I said, afraid to rock that boat. As the country expanded westward, the issue of permitting slavery in new territories would continue to threaten a fragile union. The Missouri Compromise of 1820, signed by President Monroe, temporarily diffused the situation, more or less just kicking a growing rock down that road. After the War of 1812, the United States experienced the era of good feelings, relative political peace, economic growth, and a nationalistic fervor. So, there wasn't no real political difficulties like we had under Washington, Adams, Jefferson. We've seen a lot of this go on, and then Madison, you had the War of 1812. The economy was growing, and of course there were a lot of people, yeah, I'm an American. We know how bad nationalism tends to get, though. President Monroe invigorated this spirit with goodwill tours throughout the country and ensuring that the public buildings at Washington, including the President's House, were restored after they were destroyed by the British. Working with Secretary of State John Quincy Adams, future president himself, Monroe professed American sovereignty from the European nations while asserting a national right of influence over the Western Hemisphere, an idea that would later be called the Monroe Doctrine, which shaped the new century of international relations between the U.S. and the world, influencing American presidents and policymakers who sought to make the country a global power. Yeah, it's like, look, we've got a lot of young nations, they're growing. We are discovering our own power. But of course, again, there's always these egomaniacal, monstrous bastards, war-hungry fucks who will seek to use the Monroe Doctrine as a right to spread influence through military or subterfuge or espionage instead of, hey, we're protecting the fellow young nations that are trying to grow their independence, their freedom. It's like, God damn it! Anyway, yeah. This is from Trump White House. Fuck Trump White House. From Wikipedia, last of the founding father presidents of the U.S., the fifth president, last of the Virginia dynasty, which was four of the first five presidents. Very close with Madison and Jefferson. So yeah, served in the Revolutionary War, graduated from William and Mary in 1776. The U.S. Revolution was underway, so clearly he didn't spend any time before going into the military, fighting in the Revolutionary War. I think, which ended what, 1780? It was the early 1780s, like 1782, 83, in that era period of time there, I should say. Yeah, serving 1775 to 1777 in the Revolutionary Army, then in a militia from 1777 to 1780. So, Continental Army, Virginia Militia. In the Army, he was lieutenant, reached the rank of major, and in the militia reached the rank of colonel. Part of the 3rd Virginia Regiment, and was at the battles of New York and New Jersey campaign, Battle of Trenton, which we know injured in that battle. He was in the Philadelphia campaign. He was at Valley Forge, and he was at the Battle of Monmouth. Politician, lawyer, with graduating from William and Mary. His had 3 children with Elizabeth Courtwright, who would die 1 year before he would. She died 1830. He would die in 1831 in New York City. Was a delegate from Virginia to the Congress of Confederation. Which is the legislative body during the Articles of Confederation. And then he became a member of the Virginia House of Delegates, serving a number of times there, clearly. Before he became a member of the Congress of Confederation, after he left the Congress of Confederation, and once more before the War of 1812. So yeah, he spent a few times in the Virginia House of Delegates. Was the U.S. Senator representing Virginia, not 1790 to 1794. United States Minister to France, serving under Washington. He was the United States Minister to the United Kingdom, serving under Jefferson. The 12th and 16th Governor of Virginia, first time before the War of 1812. Oh, sorry. First time 1799 to 1802. Second time a few months before the War of 1812. And he was the 8th U.S. Secretary of War, serving a few months under Madison, and the U.S. Secretary of State under Madison, and eventually the 5th President. So yeah. The marked site of where his parents' house is 1 mile from the unincorporated community today known as Monroe Hall, Virginia. And the James Monroe family home site was listed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1979. His father worked as a craftsman and was a patriot who was involved in the protest against the Stamp Act. His mother was the daughter of a Welsh immigrant whose family was one of the wealthiest in King George County. His paternal great-grandfather, Patrick Andrew Monroe, immigrated to America from Scotland in the mid-17th century as a royalist after the defeat of Charles I in the English Civil War, and was part of the ancient Scottish clan known as Clan Monroe. In 1650, he patented a large tract of land in Washington Parish, Westmoreland County, Virginia. Also among James Monroe's ancestors were French Huguenot immigrants who came to Virginia in 1700. Uh, at age 11, he was enrolled in Campbelltown Academy, the only school in the county, and was considered the best. The school itself was considered the best in the colony of Virginia, which is why Monroe was later able to immediately take advanced courses in Latin and mathematics at the College of William and Mary. He only attended the school 11 weeks a year as his labor was needed on the farm. We see this often with a lot of the early days of American history. A lot of people who did go to school, often they had to use a lot of their labor on the homesteads as well, because even if you owned slavery, there was still a lot you had to do. He formed a lifelong friendship with older classmate, future Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, and one of the best justices who had such an influence on the Supreme Court, John Marshall. In 1772, his mother died after giving birth to her youngest child, and his father died soon after, leaving him as the eldest son in charge of the family. Though he inherited property, including slaves, from both of his parents, the 16-year-old Monroe was forced to withdraw from school to support his younger brothers. His childless maternal uncle, so his mother's brother, Joseph Jones, became the surrogate father to Monroe, and his siblings, and paid off his brother-in-law's debts. A member of the Virginia House of Burgesses, Jones took Monroe to the capital of Williamsburg, Virginia. It wasn't yet Richmond, and enrolled him in the College of William and Mary in June 1774. Yeah, William and Mary, old college. As you can see, 1774. That's before independence was declared. This is one of the older schools in what would become the United States. So, yeah. Jones also introduced Monroe to important Virginians such as Thomas Jefferson, Patrick Henry, and George Washington. So he clearly had the contacts as well he needed early on. During this phase of the American Revolution, opposition to the British government grew in 13 colonies in reaction to the Intolerable Acts, a series of harsh laws against the colonies in response to the Boston Tea Party. In Williamsburg, British Governor John Murray, the 4th Earl of Dunmore, dissolved the assembly after protest by the delegates, who then decided to send a delegation to the First Continental Congress in Philadelphia. Yeah, cracking down sometimes isn't the right answer in these situations. Dunmore wanted to take advantage of the absence of the Burgesses who had convened to Richmond and had soldiers of the Royal Navy confiscate the weapons of the Virginian militia, which alarmed militiamen and students of the College of William and Mary, including Monroe. Yeah, often it's better to try to see if you can come to some kind of an agreement, because cracking down's only going to make people more resistant to you. It's human nature, just the way it is. They marched to the governor's palace and demanded that Dunmore return the confiscated gunpowder. When more militiamen arrived in Williamsburg under the leadership of Patrick Henry, Dunmore agreed to pay compensation compensation for the confiscated goods. Monroe and his fellow students were so incensed by the governor's actions that they conducted daily military drills on campus afterward. On June the 24th, 1775, Monroe and 24 militiamen stormed the governor's palace, capturing several hundred muskets and swords. So yeah, you can see things getting worse and worse. And of course, he would go into the Continental Army, serving in Virginia's 3rd Regiment. And yeah, serving at a number of the major battles and stuff. But we'll quit reading that because I do want to get over here to the presidency of Monroe. Democratic Republican, won in a landslide against Federalist Rufus King, who served as a secretary under Madison. I can't remember what executive department it was in, but he did serve under Madison because I remember the name quite well. I think he served under Madison. I remember the name Rufus King. Maybe he served under Adams. But I remember the name a lot. Yeah, but it was the last of the elections in which the Federalists yielded a presidential candidate, which means the Federalists would go from being a national party to a state party. Monroe himself would seek to eliminate political parties, and the Federalist Party faded as a national institution during his presidency. And the Democratic Republicans also stopped functioning as a unified political party. And the period, thus, because there was no political turmoil, part of that came to help lead it to be called the era of good feelings. There were no more solidified political parties on a national level. Think of how it would feel if there were no more Democrats and Republicans nationally. God, that would be fucking nice. But yeah, here's what the U.S. election looked like when he beat King to get elected the first time. Monroe had all these states in green. King, he had Delaware, Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Maine. Yeah, it was a pretty good drubbing. Oh, this up here wasn't Maine yet. It was still considered Massachusetts. So it was Massachusetts, Connecticut, Delaware that voted for Rufus King. His people under him during that presidency of Monroe, his vice president who served as vice president the entire time, Daniel D. Tompkins. His two secretaries of state, Richard Rush, acting secretary. I think he acted over from the Madison presidency. Yeah, see, there's Rush, though I think he got moved up to Secretary of State as an acting secretary for Monroe, even though he was still Attorney General. And then Monroe would bring John Quincy Adams in to become the Secretary of State, who would serve the rest of his term. Not a lot of turnover under Monroe, which is great. Absolutely wonderful. I guess that's also why it was an era of good feelings. There was no wars, no real political back and forth. So yeah, Secretary of the Treasury, I think Crawford, yeah, was left over from Madison, and he served the entire time under Monroe. So yeah, he was in there for quite a while. Secretary of War, George Graham. Again, I think he stayed over from Monroe, George Graham, and was there a little bit for Monroe, but would be replaced by John C. Calhoun. Uh, Richard Rush would continue to serve as Attorney General from Madison for a little while before being replaced by William Wirt. It would be the Secretary of the Navy. It looks like we would see the most turnover. Benjamin Williams Crowninshield, I think, who was left over from the Madison presidency. Yeah, he would serve under Monroe for a little bit, be replaced by Smith Thompson, who would finish out Monroe's first term, serving into the second a little ways, and finally finishing out Monroe's term would be Samuel L. Southard. Calhoun, Quincy Adams would be part of the four-man race for the presidency after Monroe. Because you would have also in that Andrew Jackson. I'm trying to remember the fourth man. Henry Clay, I'm wanting to say. Because I believe this is the point when you have, this was a corrupt bargain. Because Clay would drop out, giving his constituency to John Quincy Adams, basically telling his people, say, vote for Quincy Adams. Quincy Adams would win, and Andrew Jackson would look at it as the corrupt bargain. I think this was the presidency that happened in. Let me look this up right quick. Yeah, 1824. So it would be the next presidency. The 1824 original corrupt bargain from AI here. Four Democratic Republican candidates: Andrew Jackson, John Quincy Adams, Henry Clay. Oh, it's William Crawford. I could have swore I saw Calhoun in there. Maybe it was William Crawford then. Ran for president. Jackson won the most popular votes and the highest number of electoral votes, but failed to secure a required absolute majority in the Electoral College. So he may have had a plurality, but not a majority of electoral votes. But he's saying, look, I got the most popular votes, and of everybody, I got the most electoral votes. According to the 12th Amendment, the decision went to the House of Representatives, which had to choose from the top 3 candidates. Henry Clay, who finished 4th, was eliminated, and who was also Speaker of the House, used his immense political influence through his support behind John Quincy Adams, in which Adams would win the House vote and appoint Clay as his Secretary of State, and Andrew Jackson. This was a corrupt bargain. But like I said, that's further down the road. The corrupt bargain. Because now we're dealing with the last of the founding fathers who served as president. James Monroe. And so that gives us a look at Monroe, an overview of him overall, and his presidency overall. With this will mean next episode I'll be talking about Daniel Tompkins. Maybe I'll even talk about Rush and Quincy Adams. I could swear there was a Calhoun instead of Crawford, but yeah. So it was Crawford, Quincy Adams, Clay, and Jackson. But we'll go ahead and end this episode here. As always, educate thyself, think, read, study, learn. Someone tells you something you have trouble believing, ask them to cite their sources, and it can't be a bunch of tin-full hat-wearing sources or anecdotes thrown together to try to make sources. I'll be putting my links and sources in the description box below the video. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you all in the next one. Until then, later.